The clock on the kitchen wall showed 6:45 p.m. when Lisa wiped down her fifth table of the evening. Her feet were already aching, and the real rush hadn't even started yet. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and forced another smile as a couple walked past her toward the entrance of the Grand Oak restaurant. 3 months. That's how long she'd been working these double shifts, watching her bank account grow with painful slowness. Every dollar had a purpose. Every tip went straight into the jar she kept on her dresser, labeled simply, "Last semester." At 24 years old, Lisa was so close to finishing her music degree that she could almost taste it. Just one more semester. 4 more months of tuition. Then maybe, just maybe, she could stop carrying trays and start doing what she was actually trained to do. But tonight wasn't about dreams. Tonight was about surviving the biggest private party the restaurant had hosted in months. The entire main dining room had been reserved for some tech guy's birthday celebration. Lisa had heard the other servers talking about him in hushed, slightly nervous tones. Rich, demanding, the kind of customer who could make or break your entire night with a single complaint to the manager. She pushed through the kitchen doors, balancing 3 plates of appetizers on her arm. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. White roses in crystal vases sat on every table. Candles flickered in expensive holders. The lighting had been dimmed just enough to create that exclusive, intimate atmosphere that wealthy people seem to love. And in the corner, catching the soft glow of a spotlight, sat the restaurant's crown jewel, the Steinway grand piano. Lisa's steps slowed for just a moment as she passed it. The instrument was gorgeous, all gleaming black lacquer and perfect ivory keys. She'd walked past it hundreds of times during her shifts, and each time it felt like a small betrayal. Here she was, trained in classical piano since she was 6 years old, and the closest she got to a real instrument anymore was serving food next to one. The guests had started arriving 20 minutes ago, and already the room hummed with that particular energy wealthy people brought with them. Designer dresses, expensive watches, conversations peppered with mentions of investments and vacation homes and things Lisa couldn't even imagine affording. She delivered the appetizers to table 7, refilled water glasses at table 3, and tried to become invisible in the way all good servers learned to do. "More champagne over here," someone called out, snapping their fingers in her direction. Lisa grabbed a fresh bottle from the bar and made her way over. The party's host sat at the center table, surrounded by a cluster of guests who laughed a little too loudly at everything he said. Richard something. She'd heard his name but couldn't quite remember it. He looked to be in his early 40s with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. His suit probably cost more than Lisa made in 3 months. As she poured champagne into outstretched glasses, she couldn't help but let her gaze drift back to the piano. It really was beautiful. She wondered if anyone here even knew how to play it, or if it was just another expensive decoration. Like the crystal vases. Like the imported marble floors. Pretty things for pretty people who could afford to ignore their purpose. "That'll be all," someone said dismissively, and Lisa realized she'd been standing there too long, staring at the piano like some starstruck kid. She hurried back to the kitchen, her cheeks burning. Focus. She needed to focus. This wasn't the time to get lost in dreams about music and concert halls and all the things that felt impossibly far away. This was the time to work, to smile, to earn tips, and to get one step closer to finishing what she'd started. The evening wore on in the usual blur of activity. More appetizers, more drinks, more wealthy guests arriving in clouds of expensive perfume and cologne. Lisa moved through it all on autopilot, her mind partly occupied with calculating hours and wages. If she picked up 2 extra shifts next week, and if the tip stayed decent, she might be able to put away another $300. Every little bit helped. Around 8 p.m., there was a commotion near the entrance. A woman in a black dress rushed and spoke urgently with the manager, and then rushed back out again. Lisa caught fragments of the conversation as she passed by with a tray of dirty dishes. "Can't make it. Terrible flu. Tried everything." The manager looked panicked. He glanced toward the main dining room, then at his phone, then back at the departing woman. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't good. Lisa didn't think much of it as she continued her rounds. She had her own problems to worry about. Table 9 needed their entrees. Table 5 wanted more bread. The birthday host's table was running, low on champagne again, and she'd learned quickly that running low on anything at a party like this was basically a cardinal sin. When she returned to the main dining room with fresh champagne bottles, she noticed the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The host looked annoyed, checking his phone repeatedly and saying something to the people around him that made them look uncomfortable. Whatever entertainment he'd planned seemed to have fallen through. Lisa kept her head down and kept working. It wasn't her problem. Her problem was making it through the next 3 hours without her feet giving out completely, then getting home, in time to grab 5 hours of sleep before her morning shift at the coffee shop. That was her real life, not whatever drama was unfolding at the rich people's party. She was refilling water glasses at a table near the piano when she felt it again. That pull, that longing. Her hands slowed as she poured, her eyes drifting to the keys. How long had it been since she'd played on an instrument like this? Months. Maybe longer. The practice rooms at school had upright pianos, functional but nothing like this. Her apartment certainly didn't have space for a piano. Some nights she practiced on an electronic keyboard she'd bought used, but it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. "Excuse me, miss, the water?" Lisa snapped back to attention, realizing she'd overfilled the glass and water was spilling onto the white tablecloth. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, grabbing her towel and dabbing at the spill. "I'll get you a fresh napkin right away." Her face burned as she hurried away. She was being sloppy, distracted. That piano was like a magnet tonight, pulling her attention when she needed to be focused on work. She couldn't afford to mess up. Not on a night like this, with tips that could make a real difference in her savings. But as she returned to the kitchen to grab fresh linens, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The host's growing irritation. The mysterious cancellation. The way that piano sat there in the corner waiting. It all felt like pieces of something larger, like the first few notes of a song she couldn't quite recognize yet. She had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would be different, that the piano she'd been stealing glances at all night would become the center of attention, that the rich man at the center table would notice her looking, and that one moment of humiliation would turn into an opportunity she never could have imagined. For now, though, she just grabbed the fresh napkins and headed back out to face another hour of serving people who lived in a different world. A world where pianos were decorations and dreams were things you could actually afford to chase. Her world was smaller than that, simpler. But it was hers, and she was fighting for it one shift at a time. The moment happened so quickly that Lisa almost missed it. She was clearing dessert plates from table 12 when she heard the host's voice rise above the general chatter of the party. Not shouting exactly, but loud enough that conversations around the room started to fade. People turned to look. The kind of attention shift that made servers nervous because it usually meant something had gone wrong. "This is unacceptable," he was saying into his phone, his jaw tight with frustration. "I paid for entertainment. I paid for a pianist. You're telling me there's no backup? No one else available?" Lisa kept her eyes down and continued stacking plates. Whatever was happening, it had nothing to do with her. The last thing she wanted was to get pulled into some wealthy client's disappointment. She'd learned that lesson the hard way during her first month at the restaurant. Stay invisible. Do your job. Don't get involved. But as she turned to head back to the kitchen, she made a mistake. A small one, but enough. Her eyes drifted to the piano again, just for a second, just long enough to imagine what it would feel like to sit there, to let her fingers find those keys, to play something real instead of just walking past it night after night. "You." The word cut through the air like a knife. Lisa froze, her hands full of dirty plates, and slowly turned around. The host was looking directly at her. His phone was down now, the call apparently over. His eyes had followed her gaze to the piano, and something in his expression had changed. Not kindness exactly. More like curiosity mixed with amusement. The look a cat might give a mouse. "Come here," he said, gesturing with one hand while taking a sip of champagne with the other. Lisa's heart started hammering in her chest. Every instinct told her this wasn't going to be good, but she couldn't exactly refuse, not in front of the entire party, not with her manager watching from the corner of the room. She set down the plates on the nearest empty table and walked over, very aware that every eye in the room was now on her. "Yes, sir?" she asked quietly. "Is there something wrong with your meal?" "The meal is fine," he said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "I've been watching you all evening. You keep staring at that piano like it owes you money." A few people at his table chuckled. Lisa felt her face grow hot. "I apologize if I've been distracted, sir. It won't happen again." "Don't apologize," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm curious. Do you play?" The question hung in the air. Lisa hesitated. This felt like a trap, but she couldn't figure out what kind. Around her, the party guests had gone quiet, sensing something interesting was about to happen. Entertainment, but not the kind that had been planned. Yes, sir, I do play. A little?" "A little," he repeated and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "How convenient. You see, my pianist canceled on me tonight, left me without entertainment for my guests. And here you are, a server who plays piano. What are the odds?" Lisa's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going now, and she wanted to be anywhere else. Anywhere but here, standing in front of this room full of strangers who looked at her like she was part of the decoration. "I'm sure we can find a professional pianist, sir," she started to say. "Maybe tomorrow night, or if you give me a moment, I can ask my manager to make some calls." "No need," he interrupted, standing up now. He was tall, and the way he moved commanded attention. The entire room seemed to tilt toward him. "We have a pianist right here. You want to play that piano, don't you? I see it in your face every time you look at it." "Sir, I'm working right now. I really should—" "Tell you what," he said, and his voice got louder, more performative. He was enjoying this now, playing to his audience. "Let's make it interesting. You entertain my guests. Play us something on that piano you've been eyeing all night. If you're good enough to impress us, I'll give you a $1,000 tip. Cash. Right here, right now." The room erupted in murmurs. $1,000. Lisa's mind raced. That was nearly 3 weeks of work. That was textbooks and groceries and rent money. That was real. "But," he continued, raising one finger, and the room went quiet again, "if you bore us, if you waste our time with amateur playing, then you work the rest of tonight for free. No wages, no tips, nothing." "Richard, come on," someone at his table said, laughing uncomfortably. "That's not fair." "It's perfectly fair," Richard replied, not taking his eyes off Lisa. "She gets a chance to prove she's more than just a server. Isn't that what everyone wants, a chance? Well, here's yours, sweetheart. Take it or go back to refilling water glasses." Lisa stood there frozen between humiliation and something else, anger maybe, or pride. This man had no idea who she was. No idea that she'd spent 18 years of her life studying music, that she'd won scholarships and competitions, that she'd played in recital halls in front of actual musicians who understood what they were hearing. But he also had no idea that she needed that $1,000 more than she needed her dignity right now, that she was 4 months away from finishing her degree and that every single dollar mattered, that she'd been working herself to exhaustion trying to make it all work. "What do you say?" Richard pressed, spreading his arms wide like a game show host. "Do we have a deal?" The manager was watching from the doorway now, his expression unreadable. Lisa knew he wouldn't stop this, wouldn't protect her. The customer was always right, especially customers who spent this kind of money. She looked at Richard's face, at the smug certainty there, at his guests, some looking entertained, others looking uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to speak up. At the piano, sitting there in its spotlight waiting, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion from working too many hours. Maybe it was the frustration of walking past that instrument every single shift, knowing what she could do with it but never getting the chance. Maybe it was just being tired of people like Richard, people who saw her as nothing more than someone to pour their drinks. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'll do it." Richard's smile widened. "Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, our entertainment for the evening." He started clapping, slowly at first, and others joined in. It sounded mocking to Lisa's ears. Polite but not sincere. The kind of applause you give when you're expecting to be amused by someone else's failure. Lisa walked toward the piano, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting up. Someone laughed quietly. Someone else said something she couldn't quite make out, but the tone was clear enough. They thought this was going to be a disaster. They thought she was some delusional server who'd played chopsticks at home a few times and thought that made her a musician. They were already planning how they'd tell this story later, at their next party, at their next gathering of people who'd never had to work for anything. She reached the piano bench and sat down slowly. The leather was soft under her, expensive. Everything in this room was expensive. Everything except her. Lisa looked at the keys, and for a moment all the noise and whispers and pressure faded away. She'd been playing piano since she was 6 years old. Her mother had scraped together money for lessons, had driven her to recitals, had believed in her even when money was tight and keeping up with the other music students seemed impossible. She thought about her professor at the conservatory, the one who'd told her she had real talent, the one who'd encouraged her to keep going even when the money ran out and she'd had to take a break from school. She thought about every hour she'd spent practicing, every piece she'd struggled with and eventually mastered, every moment she'd doubted herself but kept going anyway. And she thought about Richard, standing behind her with his champagne and his smugness and his absolute certainty that she was about to embarrass herself. Lisa placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool under her fingertips, familiar, like coming home after a long journey. The room behind her went completely silent, waiting, judging, ready to laugh. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes came out softer than Lisa intended. Her fingers were trembling just slightly, enough to make the sound waver. Behind her, she heard someone snicker. Someone else whispered something that got a quiet laugh in response. She stopped, lifted her hands from the keys, took another breath. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd played in front of audiences before. Real audiences, not rooms full of people waiting for her to fail. But those performances had been different. She'd been a student then, a musician, someone with a right to be on that stage. Here she was just the help. The server who'd gotten too big for her britches, as her grandmother would have said. Lisa opened her eyes and looked at the keys. Black and white, simple and clear. They didn't care who was playing them. They didn't care about expensive suits or $1,000 bets or who belonged where. They just waited for someone who knew how to make them sing. She thought about what piece to play. Something safe would be smart. Something easy that she could get through without mistakes. A simple classical piece that would satisfy the bet and get her back to work. That's what a smart person would do. But Lisa was tired of being smart. Tired of playing it safe. Tired of making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. She placed her hands back on the keys, found her starting position, and made a choice. Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2. One of the most technically difficult pieces in classical repertoire, the kind of piece that could make professional pianists nervous. The kind of piece that required not just skill but heart. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. The opening notes rolled out like thunder. Deep, powerful, commanding. The kind of sound that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. Lisa felt her muscle memory take over, her fingers finding the patterns they'd practiced hundreds of times, thousands of times. The whispers stopped. She moved into the first major progression, her right hand dancing across the upper register while her left hand held down the foundation. The piano responded beautifully, better than any instrument she'd played in months. The sound filled the room, rich and full, and for a moment Lisa forgot where she was. She was back in the practice rooms at the conservatory, working through this piece measure by measure with her professor. She was 15 again, hearing Rachmaninoff for the first time and just knowing that this was what music was supposed to sound like. She was every version of herself that had ever sat at a piano and felt that electric connection between thought and sound. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting the rapid ascending passage that always gave students trouble. She'd struggled with it 2 years ago, spending hours getting the timing just right. But now it flowed naturally, each note crisp and clear, building toward the emotional crescendo that made this piece so powerful. Behind her, the room had gone completely silent. No whispers, no laughing, no clinking of glasses or scraping of chairs, just the piano, filling every corner with sound. Lisa leaned into the dramatic middle section, letting her whole body move with the music. This was the part that required not just technical skill but interpretation. The part where you had to make choices about dynamics and tempo, about when to push and when to pull back. Her professor had always said this section separated the students from the musicians. She thought about all the times she'd played this piece. In recitals, in competitions, alone in practice rooms at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, because she was worried about money or grades or whether she was good enough. The piece had been with her through everything, and now it was here with her again, in the strangest performance of her life. The technical demands increased. Complex chord progressions in the left hand while the right hand carried the melody. Then they switched, the melody diving low while intricate patterns danced above. Lisa's hands moved independently, having their own conversation across the keys. And she marveled at how the years of training had become so automatic that she didn't have to think about the notes anymore. She could just feel them. She glanced up for just a second, barely breaking her concentration, and caught sight of her reflection in the piano's polished surface. A tired server in a white shirt and black apron, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup except what she'd hastily applied before her shift. But in that moment playing this music, she didn't look tired. She looked alive. The piece moved into the quieter interlude, the part that always made her throat tight. These were the measures that sounded simple but required perfect control. Too loud and you ruined the intimacy. Too soft and the emotion disappeared. It was like holding something fragile, keeping it safe while still letting people see its beauty. Lisa let the notes breathe, gave them space. This section was about longing, about reaching for something just out of grasp. She understood that feeling better than ever. Every day she spent serving tables instead of playing music. Every night she went home too exhausted to practice. Every time she looked at her bank account and wondered if she'd ever finish what she'd started. It was all there in the music. The hoping, the struggling, the refusing to give up even when everything said you should. And then the build started again, slow at first like a tide coming in, the left hand establishing the rhythm, steady and sure, the right hand adding layers, complexity, urgency. This was the part where the piece stopped asking questions and started demanding answers. Lisa's hands moved faster now, the technical challenges coming rapid fire. Octave jumps, rapid scales, chord progressions that required her fingers to stretch across keys that seemed impossible to reach. But she'd practiced this. She'd lived this. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind couldn't keep up. The sound swelled, filling the restaurant with cascading notes that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She was playing forte now, full power, and the Steinway responded magnificently. This was what the instrument was made for. Not to sit quietly in corners looking pretty, but to roar. Sweat had started to form on her forehead. Her shoulders ached from the intensity. Her fingers were starting to feel the strain. But she couldn't stop now. Wouldn't stop. The piece had its own momentum and she was riding it, trusting it to carry her through. She thought about Richard and his smug smile. His $1,000 bet. His absolute certainty that she would embarrass herself. She thought about all the Richards she'd encountered in her life. People who looked at where she came from and decided they knew what she was capable of. People who saw a server, a scholarship student, someone from the wrong side of town, and assumed that meant something about her worth. This was for all of them. Every person who'd ever underestimated her. Every time she'd been made to feel less than. Every moment she'd questioned whether she belonged in the world she was fighting so hard to enter. The final section approached. The triumphant conclusion, the part where all the struggle and beauty and complexity came together in a resolution that felt both inevitable and surprising. Lisa's entire body was engaged now, swaying with the rhythm, her feet working the pedals, her arms extending and contracting as she reached for different registers. She could feel the ending coming. The final cascade of notes that would bring everything home. Her heart was pounding, her breath coming fast, but her fingers never faltered. They knew the way. The last chord progression built higher and higher, louder and louder, and then the final notes rang out, powerful and clear, hanging in the air like something solid you could touch. Lisa lifted her hands from the keys and sat very still. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and quick. Could feel her pulse in her temples. Could sense the room behind her frozen, waiting. And then something happened that she never expected. Someone started to cry. Lisa turned slowly on the piano bench, her hands still shaking from the performance. Her heart was beating so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. She searched the faces staring back at her, trying to read their expressions. Had she failed? Had she somehow made a fool of herself despite playing one of the best performances of her life? Then she saw her, an older woman in an elegant navy dress sitting 3 tables back. Tears were streaming down her face and she wasn't even trying to wipe them away. She was just staring at Lisa with an expression that looked like wonder mixed with something else. Recognition, maybe, and then the woman started to clap. It began slowly, deliberately, each clap distinct and clear. Then the man next to her joined in. Then someone else. And then, like a wave breaking, the entire room erupted. People weren't just clapping politely, they were on their feet. The sound of applause thundered through the restaurant, bouncing off the walls, growing louder and louder. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. A few were saying, "Oh my God," over and over again. Lisa sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. She'd expected polite acknowledgement at best, mocking laughter at worst. But this was something else entirely. That was incredible. Someone shouted from the back. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Another voice called out. The woman who'd cried first was making her way through the tables toward the piano. She moved with purpose, and something about the way people stepped aside for her suggested she was someone important. She reached Lisa and held out her hand. "My name is Catherine Wells," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm the conductor of the City Symphony Orchestra." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She knew that name. Everyone in the music world knew that name. Catherine Wells had conducted in concert halls around the world. She'd worked with some of the greatest musicians alive. That was Rachmaninoff's second, Catherine continued, still holding Lisa's hand. One of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. And you just played it from memory, in a restaurant after what I assume was a full shift of work. Who are you? My name is Lisa, she managed to say. I'm a student, or I was. I had to take a break from the conservatory because... She trailed off, suddenly aware of how many people were listening. Because of money? Catherine finished gently. You couldn't afford to continue? Lisa nodded, not trusting her voice. Catherine's expression shifted to something fierce. What year were you in? I'm supposed to be a senior. I just need 1 more semester to graduate. I've been saving up to go back. What's your focus? Performance? Composition? Performance. Classical piano. Catherine turned to address the room, her voice carrying the same authority she probably used in concert halls. Does everyone understand what we just witnessed? This young woman just performed a piece that professional pianists practice for months to master. And she did it with 4 hours of serving tables in her legs and probably without having touched a decent piano in who knows how long. She turned back to Lisa, pulling a business card from her purse. I want you to call my office Monday morning. We have a scholarship program specifically for talented students who need financial support. I'm not making any promises, but I can promise you that someone will listen to your story and hear you play. Lisa took the card with trembling fingers. She couldn't speak, couldn't quite believe this was real. Other people were approaching now, gathering around the piano. A man in an expensive suit introduced himself as a music teacher who'd studied at Juilliard. A younger woman said she ran a foundation that supported arts education. Someone else owned a music venue and wanted to know if Lisa ever performed publicly. The attention was overwhelming. Lisa had spent so long being invisible, being just another server in a room full of wealthy people, that she didn't know how to handle being seen. Really seen. Not as help or background or someone who existed to bring them things, but as a person with talent and value and something important to offer. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Richard. He was still at his table, but he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked stunned, like someone had hit him over the head with something heavy. His friends were patting him on the back, saying things she couldn't hear, but his expression was strange. Complicated. After what felt like forever, the crowd around the piano started to thin. People returned to their tables, still talking excitedly. Catherine squeezed Lisa's shoulder once more before walking back to her seat, and Lisa found herself alone at the piano again, the business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and started to walk back toward the kitchen. She still had a job to do. Tables to clear. Customers to serve. The real world pushing back in after those few minutes of something extraordinary. Wait. Richard's voice stopped her. She turned to see him standing now, walking toward her. The swagger was gone. He moved differently, carefully, like someone navigating unfamiliar ground. He stopped a few feet away and for a moment just looked at her. Really looked at her, probably for the first time all evening. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. The room had gone quiet again. People watching this interaction with the same intensity they'd watched the performance. What I did was meant to humiliate you. I thought you'd play chopsticks or some simple song and my guest would laugh and I'd feel clever." Lisa didn't say anything, just waited. "I do that," he continued, and his voice had something raw in it now. "I make bets and games out of people because I can. Because it's entertaining and because no one ever stops me. And you could have said no. You could have walked away, but you didn't." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a thick stack of bills. "This is the 1,000 I promised. For winning the bet." He held it out, but Lisa didn't take it. Something about accepting it felt wrong now, like it would reduce what had just happened to a transaction. A party trick that earned payment. Richard saw her hesitation and nodded slowly. "You're right. It's not enough. What you just did, that wasn't worth $1,000. That was worth a lot more than money." He pulled out more bills, then a checkbook. He wrote quickly, tore off the check, and held it out along with the cash. $10,000, he said. "It's not about the bet anymore. Consider it an investment. In you, in your talent. In the fact that someone in this room should have seen you for who you really are a long time ago." Lisa's eyes widened. $10,000. That was more than enough for her last semester. That was textbooks and supplies and living expenses. That was everything she'd been working toward for months. "I can't accept this," she said, even as her heart screamed at her to take it. "You can and you will," Richard said firmly, "because I'm not giving you charity. I'm correcting a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. My foundation supports young artists. It's supposed to help people like you break through barriers and reach their potential. And tonight I almost crushed someone we should have been helping." He pressed the check and cash into her hands before she could protest again. "There's also my card in there," he added. "My foundation has connections. People who can help beyond just money. Networking, opportunities, introductions. I'd like to make some calls on your behalf if you'll let me." Lisa looked down at the money in her hands. At Catherine's business card, still tucked between her fingers. At the room full of people who had witnessed her playing and really seen her, for the first time. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Richard smiled, and this time it wasn't smug or mocking. It was sad. "Because someone did something similar for me once," he said. "When I was young and struggling and needed a chance. And I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be on the other side. You reminded me tonight. You reminded all of us." He looked around the room at his guests who were watching with various expressions of surprise and approval. "That's worth a lot more than $10,000, he finished quietly. "But it's a start." Lisa didn't sleep that night. How could she? The check sat on her dresser next to the stack of cash, and every time she looked at it, her heart started racing again. $10,000, Catherine Wells's business card. Richard's promise to make calls. It all felt like a dream that she was terrified would disappear when morning came. She called her mother at 6 a.m, unable to wait any longer. "Mama, something happened," she said. And then the whole story came tumbling out. The challenge. The performance. The money. Everything. Her mother cried on the other end of the phone. Happy tears, the kind that came from years of watching her daughter struggle and sacrifice and never give up. "I knew it," she kept saying. "I always knew someone would see what I see. I always knew." Monday morning arrived and Lisa's hands shook as she dialed the number on Catherine's card. A professional voice answered, scheduling her for an audition that Friday. An audition with the symphony for their scholarship program. "What should I prepare?" Lisa asked, still not quite believing this was real. "Whatever you think best represents your abilities," the voice replied. "Ms. Wells mentioned you play Rachmaninoff. Perhaps something from that repertoire?" Lisa hung up and immediately called in sick to both her jobs. She needed practice time. Real practice time. She used some of Richard's cash to rent a practice room at the conservatory for the entire week. 8 hours a day she worked through pieces, polishing everything she might be asked to play. Her old professor heard she was back and stopped by the practice room on Wednesday. "I heard a rumor about what happened at the Grand Oak," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Is it true?" Lisa told him the story, and he listened with a growing smile. "I always told you that you had something special," he said when she finished. "Not just technical skill, heart, the ability to make people feel something. That's rare, Lisa. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Friday came too quickly and not quickly enough. Lisa wore the nicest outfit she owned, a simple black dress she usually saved for auditions and recitals. She took 2 buses to get to the symphony hall, her hands clutching her sheet music even though she'd be playing from memory. The building was magnificent, all marble and high ceilings and the kind of architecture that made you whisper, even when no one else was around. A receptionist directed her to a rehearsal room where Catherine waited along with 3 other people Lisa didn't recognize. "Lisa," Catherine said warmly, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming. These are my colleagues from the scholarship committee. We've all heard about your performance, but we'd like to hear you play in a more formal setting." Lisa nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked to the grand piano that sat in the center of the room. It was even more beautiful than the one at the restaurant. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a breath. "What will you be playing for us today?" one of the committee members asked. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Lisa replied. "The same piece from Saturday night." "If that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Catherine said softly. "Please begin when you're ready," Lisa played. And this time, without the pressure of the bet, without the hostile audience, without the exhaustion of a full shift in her body, she played even better. She let herself sink into the music, into all the emotion and technical precision and pure love of the piece that had been with her for so many years. When she finished, there was silence. Then Catherine spoke. "The scholarship is yours," she said simply. "Full tuition for your final semester, plus a stipend for living expenses. And when you graduate, if you're interested, we'd like to discuss a position with the symphony. Nothing guaranteed, but we're always looking for talented musicians." Lisa's vision blurred with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much, but that wasn't all." Over the next 2 weeks, more opportunities emerged. Richard made good on his promise and connected her with people in the arts community. A music venue offered her a monthly performing slot. A local arts foundation asked if she'd be interested in teaching underprivileged kids piano on weekends. A wedding planner wanted to know her rates for events. Her life changed so quickly it gave her whiplash. She quit her job at the restaurant, though her manager hugged her and said he'd always known she was meant for bigger things. She kept the coffee shop position part-time, mostly because she liked the routine and the people there. Registration for her final semester felt surreal. She walked into the registrar's office with Catherine's scholarship paperwork and watched the balance on her account zero out. No debt, no desperate calculations about which classes she could afford, just a clear path to graduation. Her first day back in classes, her professor announced to everyone what had happened. The story had spread through the music department like wildfire. Students she barely knew came up to congratulate her. Some wanted to hear the story firsthand. Others just wanted to know how it felt. Terrifying, Lisa told them honestly, and amazing, but mostly terrifying. She threw herself into her studies with renewed energy. Every practice session felt like a gift now. Every lesson with her professor was time she didn't take for granted. She'd spent so long fighting just to stay in school that actually getting to focus on music felt almost luxurious. The performing opportunities started to build her reputation. At the venue where she played monthly, people began requesting her by name. She built a small following, mostly local but genuine. People who appreciated classical music and wanted to support a young musician making her way. The teaching surprised her most. She'd never thought of herself as a teacher, but working with kids from backgrounds like hers felt important. She saw herself in their eager faces, in their worn sheet music and secondhand keyboards. She saw how much talent existed in places where no one thought to look. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months after that night at the restaurant, she was teaching a lesson to a 10-year-old girl named Maya. The girl's family couldn't afford much, but her mother had scraped together enough for twice-monthly lessons. Maya struggled through a simple piece, frustrated with herself, and Lisa recognized that frustration intimately. "You know what helps me when I'm stuck?" Lisa said gently. "I remember that every musician you've ever heard of struggled too.
Every single one.
The only difference between them and people who quit is that they kept going. Even you? Maya asked skeptically. Especially me, Lisa replied. I almost gave up. More than once. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough, or that I didn't belong in the music world because of where I came from. What changed? Maya asked. Lisa thought about that night. About Richard's challenge. About choosing to play Rachmaninoff instead of something safe. About Catherine's tears and the standing ovation and every impossible thing that had followed. Someone saw me, she said finally. Really saw me. And it reminded me that I'd been seeing myself wrong. I'd been thinking I had to prove I belonged when really I just had to show up and be myself. Maya nodded slowly, processing this, then turned back to the piano and tried the piece again. Better this time. Lisa graduated in May with honors. Her family filled 2 rows at the ceremony. Her mother cried through the entire thing. Her younger brother kept shouting her name whenever there was a pause. It was embarrassing and perfect and everything she'd worked for. Catherine attended too, sitting with the other faculty. Afterward, she found Lisa in the crowd. I have news, Catherine said. The symphony has an opening for a second pianist. It's not a solo position, but it's full-time. Salary, benefits, the works. Are you interested? Lisa didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. 2 years later, Lisa stood backstage at the Symphony Hall, preparing for her first performance as featured soloist. She'd worked her way up from the second chair position, proved herself in countless performances, and earned this moment. She peeked through the curtain at the audience filling the seats. And there, in the front row, she saw Richard. He'd come to every major performance since that night at the restaurant, becoming an unlikely but steady supporter of her career. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod. Not proud or smug, just acknowledging, remembering. Catherine appeared beside Lisa, placing a hand on her shoulder. Nervous? She asked. Always, Lisa admitted. But ready. Good, Catherine smiled. The best musicians are always a little nervous. It means you care. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Lisa walked onto the stage to warm applause, sat at the piano and looked out at hundreds of faces. Some she knew. Most she didn't. All of them here because they wanted to hear music, wanted to experience something beautiful. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago. Exhausted and overlooked, walking past a piano she was afraid to touch. She thought about the moment she'd decided to play anyway, to risk everything on a chance that she was good enough. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play.